Welcome to Blaze News, the mandate day 32. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, President Trump announced that he's considering a new wave of sanctions and tariffs against Russia amid its war against Ukraine. In a Truth Social post, Trump said that Russia is, quote, pounding Ukraine on the battlefield, and that the measures are intended to bring the Russians to the negotiating table. According to Bloomberg, Moscow is seeking a truce in light of this news, with Trump commenting that Ukraine is holding up the peace process.
I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that. You can't do that.
Mr. President,
we're trying to help them, and Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done.
Trump is also seeking to make the world at large a more peaceful place. Yesterday, the president urged a global denuclearization while acknowledging that the U.S. and Russia must lead the charge.
It'd be great if everybody would get rid of their nuclear weapons. You know, we have Russia and us have by far the most. China will have an equal amount within 4 or 5 years. And it would be great if we could all denuclearize, because the power of nuclear weapons is crazy.
He also extended a letter to the supreme leader of Iran to make a deal regarding their nuclear program or face a U.S. military attack. Well, you might have heard of catch and release. Under President Trump, that's catch and revoke. The State Department will reportedly be using AI to target foreign nationals who demonstrate pro-Hamas sympathies and remove their visa status to remain in the country. The first individual to participate in the program reportedly has a criminal rap sheet and is going through the deportation process. On Capitol Hill, at least 70 conservative leaders call for a stopgap bill to ensure the government spending through September 30th. The memo asked Republicans for a clean CR vote to avert a government shutdown before March 14th. Their rationale is that doge can continue making cuts to the federal bureaucracy as long as the government stays open. The White House hosted its first ever crypto summit today, reversing the exile on crypto imposed by the Biden administration. Earlier, President Trump signed an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Take a look.
this is very historic, an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and digital asset stockpile. This is a promise that you made throughout the campaign, and today we're keeping that promise. The reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin that the federal government already owns, so it won't cost taxpayers a dime. This is like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. And premature sales of Bitcoin over the past years cost American taxpayers over $17 billion in lost value because we didn't have a long-term strategy.
Right.
Now we do. So.
And this is something you believe in?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
And the whole community believes in it.
Very good.
Well, like you heard there, the move is intended to create a digital Fort Knox and make America the crypto capital of the world. So promises made, promises kept. The Trump Organization is taking Capital One to court. They filed a lawsuit over the bank's sudden closure of over 300 accounts in 2021. They're calling it a clear attack on free speech and free enterprise, and they're claiming that the move was politically motivated and caused millions of dollars in damages to their business, tenants, and employees. And ActBlue, the Democrats' biggest fundraising platform, is in meltdown mode. Senior staffers are jumping ship just as Congress launches an investigation into its campaign finance practices, with key executives like the Vice President of Customer Service and the Associate General Counsel are now resigning. And it couldn't happen to a better group of people. Let's bring in Chris Bedford, who's filling in for Matthew Peterson. So let's start with the war in Ukraine, right? Because we see Joe Biden and all of his sanctions for years. They couldn't get anything done. And now President Trump is at the table. The Russians are making pretty clear moves. So obviously it's a big difference with Trump in charge. But what do you see here?
There's so much virtue signaling from Biden and a lot of the Europeans. It kind of reminded me of when you go to some college conference or some Episcopal conference and you see people say, I am standing on the indigenous land that belonged to X, Y, and Z. Like, this land is Ukraine. Well, Russia has a military in large parts of it, and the war is going worse, and We now know that top members of the Pentagon and top members of the White House and top leaders in Europe all recognize that Ukraine was not going to actually retake large portions of this. There was no option for that. So President Trump coming in here and forcing this peace is a necessary thing that no one wanted to admit. And he's got to push Russia to the table. He's got to push Ukraine to the table. And he has to use the incredible leverage the United States has to actually bring this. And that's the thing. He's using America's leverage through money, intelligence, satellites, and weapons. We have a lot of power, and through just the force of our economy. And, you know, the liberals, the Democrats almost tanked the American economy when they first tried to seize Russian assets and things that use the dollar. The American dollar is largely powered by the fact that it is the petrodollar. It was a stupid thing to try and politicize that for Ukraine. And now here we are.
Domestically, people on the right for so long have been begging to go out and sue companies that aren't doing things the right way, right? And now we see Eric Trump announce this news today that the Trump organization is going to take on Capital One in the courts. What do you make of this move?
It's lawfare. It's great. It's smart. I mean, you got to read the rules for radicals when you're part of the American right. You're not fighting, and we have not been fighting for 60 years to preserve the American way of life. We're fighting to regain it. We're the revolutionaries. There's a way that the left went from not control of the labor unions, not control of the colleges, not control of the government, no control of the different courts, to not even the unions, like I said, to control over huge aspects of all of that in less than a century. It was a long, slow march that used lawsuits, that used investigations, that used all the tools and powers that are available to you to fight back against companies that and government and NGOs and everyone else who does what they can to destroy the American way.
We've been talking about what it's like for the Democrats lately, and ActBlue is a very clear sign of things that are happening right now. So give us a sense of what this means for Democrats moving forward.
So ActBlue is essential. ActBlue is a company that has powered the Democrats now for about 16 years. Barack Obama times, it was a complete leader. And what it does is when you donate to a candidate, let's say you donate to your local congressman, your buddy who you know who's a Democrat who's running for office, a senator, a governor, let's say you donate to Barack Obama, which a lot of small dollar donors did. Your information is automatically taken into ActBlue, and then anyone who uses it, which is any actual primary winning Democratic candidate after that, you can do a one-click donation. You don't have to put in your credit card, you don't have to put in your name, you don't have to put in your address. They have all of it. So this helped power the Democratic machine. And it's a difficult program to build. Republicans had a hard time trying to catch up during the Romney years and afterwards with what ActBlue was able to do. At the same time, they haven't seemingly had the safeguards in. We've done some reporting on this. James O'Keefe has done reporting on this, on small-town donors who are donating millions of dollars that they didn't have under their name to ActBlue. So Republicans are sniffing around about the security about this and what they're doing to prevent fraud and foreign money. And then at the end of all of that, the woke left Ryan Grimm had a great story, the communist reporter, last year. The woke left is tearing itself apart at these organizations. They're just as mean to each other as they are. It's a purity thing. They're just as mean to each other as they are to everyone else. So those things combined, mixed with a big loss, you're always going to see turnover after any kind of election loss. But after a big loss, and ActBlue seems like it might be coming apart at the seams. Too early to say, though. I mean, it is still a juggernaut.
It's a good headline for a Friday either way. Don't go anywhere because we're going to be exposing more Democrat shenanigans. Natalie Winters of Steve Bannon's War Room will expose how war profiteering is a family business. Stay with us. Well, you don't go out and buy a life jacket when the boat is already sinking, and you don't go out and buy gold when the economy has already collapsed. But clearly, others are listening because gold has hit all-time highs at the first part of this year, but it's not too late for you. Birch Gold specializes in helping you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold for no money out of pocket. And they have one 5-star review out there that says they're knowledgeable, they're helpful, there's no pressure, and that's what you get with Birch Gold. You can get your free info kit on gold by texting Jill to number 989898. There's no obligation. You're only going to get information. They have an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and countless 5-star reviews. Text Jill to 989898 and let the experts at Birch Gold help you secure your future today with gold.
the story about Victoria Nuland's son, who's busy working for a think tank that's actively lobbying against President Trump's peace plan, the proposed mineral deal. He's listed as a researcher contributing to the Center for European Policy Analysis. This shows you how it is not just a family grift, but it really is the Washington consensus, whereby they view these sort of foreign, endless, forever wars as a way, everyone in the Nuland family makes a paycheck off of killing young American boys and girls in the name of democracy.
Victoria Nuland was the third highest-ranking U.S. diplomat. She served as the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs from 2021 to 2024. And now we know that days before the Trump-Zelensky meeting, that this group that her son is involved with, the Center for European Policy Analysis, was actively opposing a deal that could have eased tensions. So here with more is Natalie Winters. She's the co-host of Steve Bannon's War Room and White House correspondent. So Natalie, it's so good to see you. So let's go through this, right? The Nuland family. How are they trying to cash in on the war in Ukraine?
Well, look, this story, I think, is quite emblematic, not just of the sort of Hunter Biden trope that is the DC princelings, right? The children of all these swampy politicians, basically profit maxing off of their parents. But I think that this really reveals something much more sinister and darker, which is what we were getting to in that clip that you just played. The sort of neocon mindset where they do not care about the lives of young men, young women, young Americans. They just want to continue these forever wars. And they've identified Ukraine as sort of their next, I think, avenue to do that. And in the case of Victoria Nuland's son, I think it's quite representative of, I guess they would maybe call it family values. But this individual, David Kagan, by the way, make a quick note that his dad was the one who was writing, I believe, for The Atlantic, talking about basically making the case justifying the assassination of President Donald J. Trump just a few months before that actually materialized. But he works as sort of the director of the democracy program at this extremely globalist, EU-loving think tank, the Center for European Policy Analysis. And he was listed as a contributor to what was their 7-point peace plan for a sustainable peace. In it, it basically is just everything escalatory towards Russia. They want the use of long-range missiles. They basically pave the way for the United States to have boots on the ground in Ukraine, and they're demanding that this mineral deal not be signed because it's apparently bad for Ukraine. I think it just really is a perfect representation of the mindset. You know, you had John Brennan on MSNBC just 2 nights ago saying that he was proud that Zelensky stood up to President Trump in the Oval Office. I'm sorry, that's called being a traitor to your country if you're rooting for any other country than your own to be victorious when it comes to negotiations.
So wait, I didn't even realize that Victoria Nuland was married to Robert Kagan, and they had a child who was also a neocon taking money in from the swamp. So it kind of seems like as this USAID thing has been exposed, it's kind of it's a bipartisan uniparty neocon grift for democracy, essentially, and gayness. How much of this money is coming from USAID that actually funds these families and funds these generational sort of grifts? Where is this cash flowing from?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting derivation of generational wealth, right? All at the hands of USAID. This think tank actually did receive millions of dollars from USAID, believe it or not. I broke another story just last week showing how, believe it or not, MSNBC host Jen Psaki and former White House press secretary, her sister worked for something called Population Council International, quite a euphemistic name for basically, killing babies across the globe. But they've raked in, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. But in the case of the Nuland family, I think the USAID thing, you hit the nail on the head, right? It's a paradigm shifting issue because you realize that the enemy that we are up against, it's not just the Democratic Party. Surely their antics at the joint session address make you realize that we don't have a lot to compromise with people who can't applaud 13-year-old survivors of brain cancer. But that aside, you realize that it's the neocons and sort of the Democrat establishment that for so long have been profiting off of the way we conduct business, conduct policy here in Washington, D.C., which is all sort of this euphemistic whitewashing idea that the United States needs to promote democracy abroad. And when you really, I think, start to ask, well, what are these grants actually about? Yeah, part of it is the waste and the fraud, right? The transgender musicals, that obviously is going to drive clicks and it's crazy stories, but there's something much darker going on, right? When you see the plowing of millions and tens of millions of dollars to essentially rig elections in foreign countries, that is sort of the regime change empire that the United States has become under leaders like Obama, under leaders like Biden. And I think the really concerning part and why people should care at home is because what they've been doing overseas, right, sort of fomenting these color revolutions, they're now using those same tactics to carry out that exact color revolution against President Donald J. Trump. So when you hear them smear him and his movement, and I'm sure people watching your show, as authoritarians or as autocrats or as dictators, that sort of gives them the pretext that they have always used empirically, right, to move on regimes that they view not necessarily as hostile to the United States, right, to we the people, but to the business interests or the vested interests of Washington's ruling class.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Jen Psaki and her sister Stephanie, because it's like keeping it all in the family right now. And you got Jen's attention because she was out there posting on X back at you. She said, "You caught us, Natalie Winters. My sister, who has a PhD in public health and decades of experience trying to help address global health disparities, did indeed work for an organization that was focused on doing exactly that, a goal, in addition to addressing corruption and help feeding and treat people around the world with USAID shares." She goes, "Oh, such a burn trying to go through and help people. Congratulations, Natalie." So I look at this and I just say, Jen wasn't really happy that you were pointing this out. And I think that you replied, it felt like you hit a nerve with her.
Yeah, totally. Look, I would reject her framing. I think with that sort of, eugenics, population control, sort of Bill Gates Foundation, push that they've had across the globe, particularly in Africa, if that's something that Jen Psaki wants to lecture us on the morality of, be my guest. That's why no one watches her show. But obviously it hit a nerve, right? To respond to me, it always is a badge of honor. I love goading these people into responding to me. Just last week, Mark Zaid, one of the famous whistleblower attorneys for President Trump's first impeachment, had sort of a similar freakout moment. But I don't even really think it's about me or the story. What it is that these people, whether you want to describe them as part of the sort of media elite, the Beltway elite, just the swamp, frankly, they're so used to getting away with it, right? Accountability is something so foreign to them that they just don't like being called out, let alone by platforms that frankly have larger audience size than they do. I always say both in terms of quality and quantity of audience. But here's the thing, right? These people like Jen Psaki and really just more broadly, most people in DC, they're used to Republicans who think accountability comes in the form of strongly worded letters and harshly worded tweets, right? The same people who lecture us about fiscal sanity and the deficit for decades are the same people who sat idly by and did nothing about the copious amounts of waste, fraud, and abuse that USAID was engaging in, and they knew it all along. Now they want to sit there and act like they're all about doge. I'm sorry, what have they done for the last decade, right? Only increase the deficit and spending by trillions of dollars. So when you really drill down to it, I think the distinguishing factor between the MAGA movement and the sort of old guard Republican Party is that our goalposts for what constitutes accountability is significantly different from the sort of Paul Ryans and Mitt Romneys of the world. So if we got to keep calling these people out on Twitter, well, there's a little lag time for our elected Republicans in Congress to pick up, I think, on speed and understand what we want when we call it accountability. I'm happy to keep doing it, but it definitely hits a nerve. That's why they're engaging with it. Or, hey, maybe they just can't censor us like they used to anymore because Joe Biden's not the president. So maybe they have to do that job themselves.
It is kind of wild to see Republicans so angry or so upset or so bothered, but they're afraid to say it out loud. But they keep this whisper campaign about Doge and the cuts and how it's all making them nervous. And they're saying, well, we're going to try and codify this, but I don't think they ever would have done anything. Now, a lot of these folks you're talking about, like you see that right there from Stephanie and her sister, that they feel like this money is owed them. That this is just part of a real economy that they are a part of, that they have earned that money, they've gone to these colleges, they've taken the student loans from the government, they've been forgiven the student loans from the government, and now they're going to take millions from the taxpayer to go out and spread their largely filth around the globe. But do you feel like at this point, with the way Republicans actually are and the way that they're kind of flinching under the pressure and the way the Democrats are threatened and the way the neoconservative kind of blob ecosystem is threatened, that there are wins coming, or are you expecting more retaliation around the corner? Mitch McConnell doesn't seem like he's just going to go quietly into the night. I feel like there's another shoe that's going to drop.
Definitely. I mean, look, for starters, I think Doge is doing a wonderful job, but I think with certain departments, they need to pick up the pace. For example, $80 million in cuts at the Pentagon is nowhere near enough. I think we could add a few more zeros to that, frankly, at least. But I think also, too, perhaps the messaging on it really from the Republican side has really not been all that strong. Like I was sort of talking about before, I think Elon Musk, because he is a billionaire, really fits in nicely to sort of the autocrat, dictator trope, the oligarchic takeover of the United States of America that the mainstream media, the legacy media, has always been pushing, right? And that's sort of the frame through which they perceive of Doge, and I think kind of dupe the American people into making it look like it's this, Robin Hood kind of scheme of a billionaire stealing from the American people. I always say that framing of it is essentially victim blaming, in the sense that it's actually the American people, right? We're having our tax dollars not just be stolen from us at record rates, but when you drill down into what we're funding, at best, it's making, mice transgender, and at worst, it's rigging elections so Victoria Nuland and her family can make a lot of money. But these are the same people, right, who then turn around and they oppose President Trump's tariffs, they oppose his immigration policy, and I have no sympathy for a bunch of, I don't even know, just, left-wing educated elites who walk into their cushy jobs helping, fight whatever made-up idea they have that's a problem in the third world. I have no sympathy for them getting kicked out of their jobs, right? Where was that sympathy for the American working class in 2008, right? Did you ever see 60 Minutes interviewing a bunch of Americans who were screwed over by the policies of the same people who have now created the economic reality that is forcing President Trump to levy tariffs or reinstitute our immigration policy? So there's just so many, I think, preconceived notions in terms of the way that the media is framing this whole Doge issue that I just sort of reject at face value. But unfortunately, like you were alluding to, when everyone on the Republican side of the football is not actually on our team, and so much of it is performative activism, right? The same people who are joining the Doge caucus and posting the selfies with Elon are also the same people who are, fighting to send truckloads more in terms of aid to Ukraine, right? It doesn't quite square. So I guess it's a tale as old as time, right? It's nothing new. It's Republicans being weak and feckless and lying. But I think the only difference is that this kind of social media ecosystem through which we inhabit, and the fact that we do have President Trump in office, and shows like yours, shows like War Room, right? We have the ability to push back and move the needle. And it's why your audience is so critical and, joining the fight.
Yeah, it does seem like those posters I see outside of my office and the streets on my commute, Elon Musk, I'm stealing from you, only makes sense in Washington, D.C., because it's the rest of the country's money. It doesn't seem to make any sense on that. But the Democrats do seem to have a sympathy problem here. That one side, they're trying to paint as very sympathetic, all of these federal workers. And I know that there are families, and I have neighbors and people who are dealing with this, and they have to make hard decisions like I've had to make before when companies I was working for didn't end up working out. It's a difficult time. But at the same time, they cannot seem to be sympathetic for any of the people who are at the State of the Union, including a child with brain cancer who was, a tear-jerking moment when he was made an honorary agent of the Secret Service. And I think I'll toss it right back to you because you had some questions on that, Liz.
Yeah, this was one of my favorite moments of the week, Natalie, right? DJ Daniel, he is absolutely the star on Capitol Hill, and we actually do have your interaction with him. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Very nice to meet you.
DJ Daniels, so amazing.
I just
Absolutely
realized
incredible.
that that's the first
Thank
time I
you.
ever shook the woman's hand. That's crazy.
Oh, man. Thank you so much. Natalie, thank you so much.
Natalie, I didn't think that I could love this kid anymore, right? Like we all saw him there with President Trump when he was acknowledging him in the crowd on Tuesday night. And then I saw that and I couldn't believe how much, like my little heart just it goes out to him so much. So what was that moment like for you?
Yes, he is quite the character. I was honored to meet him. The way that whole interview materialized, it wasn't planned or anything. We just happened to be live on War Room, and he was getting ready to actually depart DC and go home. And I guess I just felt really bad because he was actually being interviewed by Caitlin Collins, if you could believe it or not. So as he was walking, I just wanted to shake his hand. I told Steve, hey, if I can grab him, can I bring him on War Room? And he said, absolutely. Of course. I think he won our audience over. If you watch the whole interview, he had some good pickup lines for a 13-year-old boy. He's very cute. But, I think he is just such a wonderful representation of the rejection of the left's idea of, victimhood culture and victimhood mentality. A kid who's been through absolute hell and back, so happy, so positive, and I say so with it and intelligent and patriotic. And I think the best part too, and I'm sure everyone has seen the Nicole Wallace and Rachel Maddow meltdowns by now, or even the fact that Democrats, refuse to applaud for him. And I think it's because he represents something so wonderful, which is that, sorry, liberals, there are some young Americans who actually want to be cops and support and back law enforcement. And despite your decades of brainwashing and propaganda, not just on young children, but this whole country, I'm sure they would rather have had him be trans, than wanting to be a police officer. Maybe Democrats would have applauded then. But I just think he represents a wonderful rejection of everything that the Democratic Party has tried to throw on particularly young kids for so long.
Natalie, we know all of the cool kids are MAGA. We know this for a fact. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be staring into the abyss, better known as Democrat social media posts, right after this. Some would argue that social media has ruined the veneer of professionalism that our lawmakers used to have. But we here at Blaze News The Mandate couldn't disagree more, as it provides us with some of our best content. And our next guest is right there with us. So joining us now is Wade Stotts. He's the host of The Wade Show with Wade, appropriately named. Thanks so much for being here, because I saw your post on X recently, and you were talking about Democrat lawmakers and calling them the civil rights reenactors. Yep. Are they down with the struggle, or are we just playing games here?
Yeah, everything that people would say about the Civil War reenactors, that they're just sort of stuck in the past and don't have anything, they do this to make themselves feel important and interesting, is true of these people. Because it's funny how they left and thought that was important enough, but nobody really noticed until they had to post about it on social media.
And there's a censure. It means shame on you.
Right.
It's not even. It's like when I tell sometimes when my kid freaks out because he's in punishment. I say, I didn't even ground you. I just told you not to knock it off, and that was bad. And he's like, how dare? Yeah. That seems like what they're dealing with. So much of the left has become cosplaying though, and sometimes the right falls into it as well. But ever since Donald Trump's been around, these Antifa guys who really think that they're French resistance, they think that they're out there by attacking old men and young women, they're out there they're storming the beaches of Normandy, that they've got this whole battle that's playing out like the Cranberries song Zombie going on in their head in real life. I mean, you see it everywhere.
Right. Yeah, they a lot of people have called them theater kids, right? That they're just doing all this sort
skinny
of
arms.
But it helps when they have maybe two things you learn about in public school history, and I think that civil rights is one of those two things. And so
slavery, Nazis, civil rights,
exactly.
Everything is through the lens of that.
Yeah, and so these guys thought they were doing something really important by wearing their important merch shirts. I think that's part of what they're doing. They're sort of, but that's the resistance is merch. The resistance will be merched.
All right. So when I look in that picture, we see Representative Jasmine Crockett, right? She's been a rising star on the Democrat side as of late. So let's go ahead and take a look at a clip that's been circulating online showing that Crockett has changed a little since taking office. Watch this.
No one could have told me that when I went down to Austin, now it looks like a little bit over a year ago, that I would be running for Congress. It's just not what my plan was. But what I've always decided is that I would step up when there was a need.
Listen, he up there, he's hearing all kinds of nonsense and bull. Let me just be real. And we weren't gonna sit for that shit. We wouldn't,
So it's two versions of Jasmine Crockett. There are plenty more out there online, Wade. Like, what are we looking at? How is she a real person?
It is wild that a lot of politicians do have secret lives that they hide from other people. Usually it's not the normal one. Usually you hide all the crazy stuff that you do. It's sort of like facing the crowd, but in reverse. So she's keeping her normal self because she has to play this character. Again, just who she thinks of as being the most important person in the room, the boss. And she's playing the role really well. Whoever cast her.
Remember when Senator Vittert back in the day got busted because turned out he was into dressing like a baby and getting hit by prison guards?
Today that would be completely normal. They would be celebrating that.
A friend of mine was high up in his office, and I remember sitting there across from lunch from him the next day and just being like, "This must be awkward for you." This must be probably the most awkward scandal I've seen in DC history.
Today, that would be his public face, and then the private life would be the normal. He has a wife and kids.
Normie senator. All right, so help me understand the internet, which is where you live.
Great. Yes.
That and the beautiful mountains. What is the Vance face thing? So I find myself laughing. I giggle at almost every one of them. I don't know why, and I kind of feel like the old guy in the commercial who walks in and says, "What's the deal with Apple Jacks? They don't taste like apple." Like I don't like what left is doing it, right is doing it, everyone's doing it. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think that what's happening is similar to what happened when the picture of Vance standing in the restroom came out. So young Vance, sort of chubby Vance with a bunch of girls lined up. The left seized on that and said, isn't that an embarrassing thing because he's a hypocrite, because he doesn't want women in men's restrooms or whatever. And then the right saw that as like, hey, I think I went to school with that guy. So I think that's what's happening a lot of times.
I played Halo with that guy.
Yeah, exactly. I know that guy. And so like chubby gamer Vance is one relatable way. So like people tried to make Vance into this wild, weird character who nobody can relate to. But as we look at him, we go, oh, somebody relates to every piece of him. Somebody relates to the, again, chubby gamer. Somebody relates to the weird autistic intellectual guy who's in a meeting with the president. So people see themselves there. And so I think a lot of times when, like, if you get Snapchat, then you first try out all the filters with your friends and you send each other funny faces. So I think that's what's happening is like they're treating him like a friend and not necessarily. And so like leftists may be making the memes thinking, hey, we're making him look insane. But I think what's really happening is, or on the right, when people see it, they go, oh, I do that with my friends. And JD Vance likes it, as we found out from Julio Rosas.
Yeah, I love, though, that the Democrats came out and they're like, oh, man, this guy is super normal. Like, what are we going to do? You know what we're going to do?
Yeah.
We're going to tell people he's weird.
Yeah.
And we're going to see if that sticks or not. But I think that JD Vance is one of the most approachable, normal politicians that we've had on this level of our government, that you can just look at it. But then you see Stephen Colbert go out there. And let's go ahead and watch what he thinks of JD Vance.
Because nobody gets treated worse than I do online. Nobody.
Oh, I'm not sure that's true. Have you seen what people are doing to JD Vance? See that? No. And I want to point out, those pictures of JD are wrong, okay? And you can tell they're wrong because they are hilarious.
But like you just said, Julio Rosas told us, like, JD's in on the joke. He likes it. He's totally fine with this. Right. And they can't get at him, right? Mm-hmm. Again, oh, he's weird. He's all this. No, he's just a normal guy who's going to go along and play along with all of these things. So they're going to have to try something else to get under his skin.
My favorite part of this is that it's a comedy show, and the biggest laughs that he got were memes that somebody else made on the internet. And so I think
it's still a comedy show.
Well, yeah, technically, I think it's listed there under the TV guide. But yeah, it is fun that he has to lean on memes created by right wingers who love JD Vance, and then none of the writers, none of the producers turned to him and said like, "Hey, right wingers are doing this too. People who like him are making these memes and laughing."
Well, they don't know any wingers.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. So no, even the people who are on the internet there cannot see themselves or can't interpret it. They see, again, a caricature. They don't see playing around and having fun.
But how about his wife, Usha, who probably made the best investment of anyone since the early crypto investors? But she started dating this chubby, awkward gamer from a tough family background, a hard scrabble background, who did not fit in at all in the Ivy Leagues. And then you see her standing next to the handsome vice president being sworn in. It's like, whoa, What an investment.
This feels like the political equivalent of like buying Amazon stock in the 90s.
Exactly.
Right? Like, they somehow, some way, you just knew this was going to work out for you.
Exactly.
And back to the relatable point, seeing JD Vance walk through Notre Dame a few weeks ago with a baby laying down on his shoulder, you just look at that and you go, that's a guy that I know that guy, or I am that guy. But yeah, no matter what if you try to make just this picture of him be the character that you have, you see the real guy, and the real guy is relatable. The guy's normal.
So what does this say about where we are right now politically, right? We just talked about the Democrats and all their crazy stuff that we were doing. We showed the Choose Your Fighter video yesterday on the show. And then you see JD Vance and everything that they're trying to do to him and Trump. And what does this say about where we are right now in the country?
Yeah. Well, Scott Adams says that his way of thinking about it is we're watching two movies on the same screen. So these are two audiences that are determining what they're looking at, what the same thing, they're looking at all the same events, and they're interpreting it in different ways. I think it shows how little we have in common, how little, and I think that what typically happens is people will disagree about interpretations of particular events, but this is something where they can't see, we cannot agree even on what is happening. There's certainly a political divide, and I think that's cultural, and it gets down to the point to where it's about what we laugh at.
The left's lost the joke. I mean, when we were growing up, the left controlled every aspect of it. And one of the ways that they did that was by not being libs. Like, they made movies that had undercurrents of liberal agendas, but they weren't over your head. And you hear the opposite. You'd see, like, I'm the conservative comedian. I'm the conservative millennial. I'm the conservative movie. And it seemed like it was bad Hallmark entertainment. Now that's completely shifted. And The Late Show and other shows are openly propaganda. It's not funny. SNL is trying to come back to it now. They have this whole thing about they're going to try and fix it because it had become so not funny, so preachy, so lectury. The movies aren't even selling the way that they used to. And at the same time, well, the right on the internet, the comedians who are questioning it, Shane Gillis, et cetera, even Dave Chappelle, who I don't think is probably a normal Republican voter, but he's making fun of them. They've lost the moment, it seems.
Well, the SNL in particular is following the internet's lead in comedy, just like we talked about with Colbert. They brought on Shane Gillis, and a lot of the sketches that they did were parodies of internet videos. All the way I remember SNL is fake medicine commercials and fake things like that are on TV, but they're following our lead, and these are people who've been raised on the internet. And so their influences, it is funny that Shane Gillis was the guy who got fired from SNL. He comes back, and then the whole show kind of bends to his sensibilities. In the same way that Nate Bargatze comes on, he's a guy who wouldn't get hired at SNL probably in that respect. But again, the show feels like his show, at least for that week.
I think the problem is I stopped doing coke. SNL is just, it's like New Yorkers, it's just lame New Yorkers now.
Yeah.
And no one's getting mugged on the way to work anymore.
Right. They started that schedule back in the 70s, doing a show in a week, and writing 90 minutes in a week is pretty insane. But yeah, nobody does coke anymore, so it slows things down.
You know what? Make America funny again. Wade Stotts, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to get in because people need their Bedford time. So we're going to take a look at what's next for the MAGA movement. Stay tuned. The MAGA movement has one goal right now, and that's winning. Block out the noise. This is about the power and control and who gets to shape the future of America. In Trump's base, they know what's at stake, and they're more fired up now than ever. We can see that all over the country. So what's the strategy for moving forward? Bedford has this in his latest Beltway brief. So let's start with the strategy as we get closer, because this is the CR fight. We know March 14th is circled on the calendar. So what do they need to do from here?
They need to fund the government. That is the biggest thing that matters right now. That is all that matters to President Trump. It's what matters to his administration. It's what matters to keeping this sort of thing going. And there's a couple different things that are coming up there. Now, the average conservative, most conservatives, basically all conservatives, hate continuing resolutions. They want to see cuts. They want to see changes in how the government's operated. So you see people looking at this and saying, I want to vote for another CR for leadership, and it's going to pass, and we're going to continue Joe Biden's spending levels, but they're not recognizing, I think it's actually starting to change on this, that this is not Joe Biden's government. This is Donald Trump's government. You have Russ Vought in there. You have Elon Musk in there. You have money that's being cut by the billions and billions and billions, and potential for impoundment from vote in OMB. And that's the process by which the president decides he's not going to spend all the money that's been given to him by Congress. This was a normal constitutional practice dating back to the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, all the way until Congress said you could no longer do it to Richard Nixon as part of the Watergate fight back. And Vote thinks that this is an unconstitutional law, and he refused to retract that during his confirmation hearings, despite them pushing, the Democrats pushing him on this. So these are the sorts of tactics they're going to try with this CR. Now, the House representatives literally can only lose one vote on this, and they already have. Thomas Massey's not going to...
We already know Thomas Massey isn't going to vote for this.
He's not playing ball. You can't even really be mad at him. No one ever expected him to play ball on this. But there are a few others who Rebecca will be interviewing this coming week in Congress who are iffy. One of the things that they want to see is actually codifying some of these doge cuts in the CR and adding that. Here's why that's entirely unrealistic. Because you need 60 votes in the Senate. And already you've got, I don't think any CRs ever passed the U.S. Senate with more than 30-something Republican votes. Because this is usually leadership mixed with Democrats to avoid the spending fight that all the conservatives want to have. So a lot of these people have never voted for this. I doubt Ron Johnson's ever voted for one. Rand Paul is not going to usually vote for them. Mike Lee, Ted Cruz. That's probably going to be different with Donald Trump in office. I think Rand Paul might be the only one who's not going to care and still may vote against it. But that means you have to find between 7 and 20 or so Democrats to vote for this, to continue it through. And they want to fight. They want a shutdown fight. But here's why that might not work out for them. I know this is going on for a little while. When you shut down the government, the executive kind of gets to decide what's essential and what's not essential. It could potentially put Doge into overdrive. I remember when Barack Obama's government was shut down, when we were fighting over Obamacare back in the day. It was so unbelievably petty. They shut down roads in national parks, which included private restaurants on them. They went down to a place where I used to rent kayaks on the Potomac River, and they said, we can't maintain your safety because we don't have funding. Therefore, you must shut down. I talked to the owner there. He had never once seen a Park Service agent in his decades there before, except for at the opening. They tried to rope off the World War II memorial and stop veterans of World War II from coming there. Thank God they pushed through.
Just from walking through.
You can't walk through. It's unsafe. The Republicans won't let you.
We can't guarantee your safety walking, so you must not do this.
They took the handles off of water fountains on the C&O Canal Trail. They tried to tape shut there was a book exchange thing in a park near my house. You could put a book in. They taped it shut and they roped off this little turtle next to the kids could play on. It's like, no, this is unsafe. The government's shut down. That is how unbelievably petty they were. So Trump can do that. But as one top administration official told me, you can't have a resistance without momentum. And the number one issue for them is to make sure their projects are still going, the money's still going, and it's coming to a head on Friday.
Now, the ironic part is that Speaker Mike Johnson is usually shamed because he needs a lot of Democrats, and there's more Democrats that support this than they should be. But that's what he actually needs right now if he wants to get this through over there in the House. I know that if they don't lose anybody else, but I don't know how likely that is on the Republican side.
The thing is, right now, if they lose one person, now in conversations we've had with Congressman Burchett, he has seemed skeptical. He has demands about Doge stuff. They're not going to lose one person, though, because then Donald Trump comes down on you like 1,000 of bricks. You could lose 10 people, though.
Has to be a group of people. Strength in numbers.
Exactly. Otherwise, that one person goes out there and says, well, I'm not doing it. And Trump just smashes them. And it's a really regrettable thing for all involved. So I don't think I actually think the House of Representatives is probably going to get this done. It's the Senate that's going to be so much trouble.
Well, I look at this, as we said earlier in the show, they want to go ahead and fund the government through September because they want to make sure that Doge can keep going. I do look at that and say, okay, even if you are a House or in the Senate, you can say, okay, this is actually going to do something a little different, but you have to believe what the Republicans are saying. And that is so difficult for me to still do. Even though we have huge wins, it's still difficult there on Capitol Hill to believe what they're saying.
Well, here's some good things. One, the Republican senators want the pressure off from Doge. Like, when you're Lindsey Graham, you want to pretend he's in cycle right now. So, of course, he's Republican right now. He goes on Hannity and says Republican things for the moment, or this or that, goes on different shows. When he's out of cycle, of course, he's vicious. But right now, he wants to make sure that money's still flowing. So he wants to have some control over it. So he's got to play ball. And by playing ball right now, he's put out, I think actually a great idea, rescissions, which allows the Senate to pull back money that it has given to different organizations. It is granted with a simple majority. All they need is 51 votes. So when the judge says, no, you actually have to give those billions of dollars away to transgender puppet shows, he can say rescission, 51 votes, done. And they can start to codify this. And then they can show that they're willing to play ball. And I think the hope is they just got all of the Republican senators just got Elon Musk's phone number. The House representatives are annoyed. They haven't all been given the same thing. I understand why. I wouldn't want to give my phone number to every member of Congress. Some of them are crazy. But that's the next step. And if Republicans can do that, then basically Elon said, well, then we can talk and be more reasonable about this stuff. That's the fight that's coming next, and it could be interesting.
We've enjoyed having you here in Dallas this week, but you will be heading back to Capitol Hill, unfortunately. You have to go back there.
Got to go back.
But give us some updates, because we've continued our conversation about the Bedford bar crawl. What do the people need to know if they need some good spots to go to? So I can tell you from personal experience, he's a very good tour guide.
So I love the old school DC. I love the dark wood panels, the heavy curtains. I love the crystal. I love that like 1960s, 70s, 80s feel of DC. And there's a good news for people who are also into old school Americana. The Occidental Grill is opening again. It's been closed for years. That's in the Willard Hotel, which is where we went. That's where the term lobbyist comes from. The mint julep was first brought to D.C. And the Occidental Grill is opening fully with a 1960s and 1970s D.C. theme. So, I mean, I'm talking like baked Alaska and the champagne pink cakes, like things that you would see in old cooking books that maybe were at your grandmother's house, with Manhattans and martinis. And I wish they could bring smoking back inside, but the whole thing is to bring back basically Nixon era United States. And I'm looking at this, I'm reading it, and I'm thinking, we are so back.
This is Americana.
It's
coming
amazing.
Back in such a good way. I do appreciate that, even though it's going to be something old and something new, right? Like, you're just bringing it all together in a very historic building.
I will never take you to a place that has fusion in the description, ever. It's got to be old school.
I appreciate that about you. But yeah, no, we've had such a good time having you here, and we just love having you as a part of this show.
It's been a blast. I love being in Dallas. Got to check out some of the spots around here. And it's back to the Mid-Atlantic where I belong.
I mean, somebody has to go out there and make sure that what they're doing on Capitol Hill, that they actually keep their act together. So we count on you and Rebecca. We look forward to the interviews that you're going to be bringing us next week there on the Hill, because it's going to be a very big week on their calendar. Will the government stay funded or not? We shall all be watching.
We got some new equipment coming in from the Blaze, so that'll be fun too.
It's going to be a good, exciting time. Some new things coming your way as soon as potentially next week. So thanks for watching, everybody. Go out there, have a great weekend, and be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and rate and review the show. It helps everybody else to find it. We'll be back on Monday. See you then.